Yeah, 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 yeah. Started in the land down under Redbelly in the mix. Blockchain revolution, fixing all the tricks. Vincent Gramoli, visionary in the game. Built a fork-proof chain, bringing the flame.
Welcome back, everyone, to another amazing Redbelly Insights. But we've got a guest on again, Vincent from Redbelly Network, founder, chief scientific officer, and many more hats that you wear, both at Redbelly and the University of Sydney. Vincent, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Mark.
It's been an amazing month since we last spoke. There's been a lot of things happening, price changes, a lot of competitiveness, a lot of talk about adoption. Even the AI space is creeping its way into blockchain, realizing they need blockchain. So many technical things. But before we get into it, could you just give us a bit of insight into what you've been up to over the last month?
Yeah, so we've been working hard on the research side of things. You might not have seen the publication yet, but it's coming. It's in the pipeline. Actually, there is one that will be coming in 8 days from now. Will be presented in Nashville in the US. It's talking about the fault tolerance of different blockchains, in which we decided to crash some of the nodes of the network, introduce partition, and drop some of the network packets just to see what impact it would have on the overall blockchain network. And we can see that some blockchains cannot even recover from transient isolated failures. So it's a big discovery in the sense that it shows that not all blockchains are mature enough to cope with the type of failures they would have on the internet or on a broad network. Of course, Redbelly was doing pretty well in the results, but I invite you to look at the details and see for yourself how it performs by looking at the paper that is available online.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, we're filming this, and it's 8 days from this filming. So it may actually be that the papers come out, and this episode is after. But as of right now, in the video digital kind of world, we have not seen the paper yet. So really excited to see how the community reacts to it, how these new insights that you guys are sharing are going to affect how we do things in the blockchain space. So the going back to the academic research that really started all of this, I think we learned in the previous episode with you more about your background and what led to the research and insights and really that academic strength there. Could you walk us through how that original academic research on distributed consensus evolved into something more fit for purpose for enterprise regulatory grade infrastructure? What parts morphed, as they traditionally do when things move from academic to commercial, and what parts stayed the same, do you think?
Yeah, so I think we had to look into security, right? Something that we wanted to ensure was certainty. We've studied blockchain a lot, and we realized that there were corner cases where the network will not behave like you would expect, and this could go as bad as double spending. And in order to make sure that the user has certainty, which means if he sees a transaction, the transaction remains, which is true immutability. It's not that simple, right? You need to come up with a consensus before opening a block, and this is what we've been doing. Just to make sure that modern application will benefit from that, where certainty is needed. And now we're talking about real world assets. We were talking about tokenization last time. These are the type of applications that requires this level of certainty that you might not have on classic blockchains, just because they were not designed for this type of application. So it might be a mismatch. So this has been the ingredient that made us quite different from the classic blockchain with this instant finality, for example. But there are other components that did not change over this transformation when we decided to move to these real-world asset use cases. And for example, we inherited the scalable version of the Ethereum virtual machines. So we still have bits and pieces that are coming directly from Ethereum. And this is a great invention in the sense that it allows generic application to be running on a blockchain. And that's something that didn't change since then. So, of course, it was a game changer in 2015 when Ethereum came out, as opposed to the classic Bitcoin. But I think it's hard to come up with an alternative, a different virtual machine with a better programming language. We have seen Move, we have seen different programming language virtual machine, I would say. But as of today, we still have this largest ecosystem of dApps that rely on Solidity and therefore the Ethereum virtual machine, which is still an invariant. Like it has been like that for a decade now.
I think it talks to how this space is, we call it blockchain, and maybe there's some weird messaging there in the name, but it is blocks, like building blocks as well, Lego blocks. There's no need to necessarily reinvent the wheel. If something is working, that's great. It's composable. We can reuse it in a better way to execute, and that's what we really need to think about. And sometimes, yes, there is a need for folks to build something different. But like you said, so many use Solidity. We've got EVMs, where people are just still using that same common kind of language. So it's great to see that, there's some smart usage of what is out there already works and what you can build and add to. And one of those things actually is this concept of in Redbelly of accountability over anonymity. What does that really mean? Because we're focused on institutional clients, because that's where a lot of the mainstream, a lot of the flows are going to come from. If you're in tokenization, you need to have flows. Otherwise, like, what's the point, right? What does accountability of anonymity mean for institutional clients and even regulators? And how does Redbelly's design, that you've designed, how does it enforce that principle?
Yeah, that's very interesting, putting these two words next to each other, anonymity and accountability. And the funny thing is, and at the beginning, I didn't realize it myself, but actually anonymity is not in conflict with accountability. And that might be very paradoxical, but you can come up with accountable anonymous solutions. So it's something that is really interesting. But essentially, yeah, we move from this space where everybody is unknown, which is a classic blockchain era. We're moving to a space where regulation is needed. For example, when Upbit got hacked recently, it was, I think there are some suspicion that it comes from North Korea, right? So there are some people in North Korea that managed to transfer some assets to an address. And this is interesting. And we don't know who these people are, because they are essentially hackers and they are running on Solana, which comes from this, series of blockchains that ensure this pseudonymity. So if you don't tell who you are, you remain kind of anonymous. And accountability is different in the sense that we're making sure on Redbelly network that you always have a link to a real user associated with any address, right? So even though you could have AI bots that are running and that are using a private public key pair, there should be a real human that is responsible for this address. And that's a big game changer, because the hack of Habit would probably not have occurred on Redbelly, because everyone is accountable. And this increases the security significantly. Now, the funny thing is that the people can still be anonymous. And the way Redbelly solved this problem is essentially Redbelly doesn't record any personal identifiable information. The user can have self-custody of their private key, for example. But the idea on Redbelly is that at some point during the process, you had to go through an identification process with an verifiable credential issuer of your choice based in your jurisdiction, for example. And this will allow you to have your public key enabled on the network. And once this is done, then you can transact without telling who you are. But the fact that there is at some point an identity provider that was informed of who you are exposes yourself in case of misbehavior, right? There could be a possibility for someone to have a legal recourse and go to his government or and law enforcement agencies, and then make sure that there will be some discussion about who could be behind this public key. And so this combination of pseudonymity that we still have and this accountability, I think it's key for trading assets in a regulated environment.
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree. And B, it's interesting when you mentioned personally identifiable information, PII, as people commonly know it, whether it's in finance, healthcare, even legal settings. There's a lot of problems when it comes to handling PII of all this information about people flying around. There's so much so that it's interesting that in the healthcare space, there's been projects that I've been part of that they don't use blockchain, but they use cryptography to combine different PII bits of information like name, surname, date of birth, other personally identifiable information, use hashing functions to, create with a salt value that changes the hashing function to create a new cryptographic identifier so that instead of the whole data being shared, just information about that person plus their identifier is shared and then remapping and joining it to trusted parties. It's an area that is crying out for blockchain, and we don't yet have as much of these digital IDs making things easier in that world. And I know that we'll get there, but it's just so interesting that they're starting to do something in that space, and yet more could be done. Now, going back to the academic parts, and we'll just round out, on the academic side here, because you definitely do wear that hat. It was great to see. And by the way, thanks for bringing your uni students to an Oz DeFi event and encouraging them to go. We've seen a few of them come along to multiple events now, pushing that from University of Sydney. But were there moments where, in terms of the research, what was theoretically elegant in research didn't translate well into practical reality? How did you navigate that?
Yeah, so that's really interesting, and it's topical because I had a discussion with one of my research students yesterday at CD Uni, where essentially we were discussing about the relevance of a theoretical solution. So at times you may feel like something is not very applicable. Just to give you two examples, maybe it's a bit complicated, but you can achieve some fault tolerance that is maximum. Like you can tolerate any number of faults, which might be a bit surprising to implement on blockchain, right? So if you define the problem of a blockchain, which is essentially, eventually you append blocks and eventually you have a chain, which is essentially what Bitcoin proposes, right? You might have forks, so it's not a chain, but at least the prefix is a chain that will never change into a tree, right? So the prefix grows, and this is the property that Bitcoins offers. And what is really interesting is that in order to implement this object, you can still have as many figures as the number of nodes. So all the nodes could be hackers, and still you can manage to implement this thing. So it's counterintuitive. Of course, if all the nodes are hackers, why do you care? So let's say if you have n-1 and you have one correct node, like nodes that really want to use the blockchain the way it is implemented, then despite having n-1, which is all the others being hackers, the problem can be solved. And that's super interesting. But the caveat is that it means that every single participant has to be not only a client, but also a server, which means they access the service of the blockchain, but they should also offer the service of the blockchain. Might be counterintuitive, and I won't go into the details right now, but we can still start thinking, is it relevant that we can tolerate n-1 faults if every node has to be actually a server? Because it means that if I have a device like this one, then it cannot be used in order to access the blockchain anymore, because it's not a node that is contributing and storing the blockchain itself.
Yeah.
But there might be, 5 or 10 years down the road, there might be another way of using this technology where actually we will trust a node that is in our vicinity and that collects the entire set of blocks. And then this solution will be usable. Otherwise, we still have to use the good old ZLB solution that we published last year, which says that we can have a majority of figures, but that cannot be more than 2n/3. So that's something that is really interesting. And there were another example, which is actually a cryptocurrency is even simpler than a blockchain problem. The cryptocurrency is just about transferring assets from A to B, pretty much, right? So you don't have to implement this chain of blocks, but you still need to have a history and make sure you don't have conflicts between these transfers. And the funny thing is that you can implement that without even consensus, without even a blockchain, but you would need to have non-conflicting transaction coming from each account, which means I cannot use multiple devices because otherwise I would generate conflicting transaction accessing the same account, or I cannot move with my mobile device while I issue transactions. And so you start thinking about the relevance of this theoretical problem in a practical setting. But maybe 10 years down the road, we're going to be using, I don't know, a mobile phone that keeps its MAC address as an identifier, or we're going to be moving with our mobile devices, and actually the biometric will be the way we authenticate. It's going to be our private key, right?
Yeah.
And that's going to be a game changer because this solution that seems irrelevant today might be relevant, will be relevant then. So
Spot
these
on.
are the type of things that we're discussing.
It's really interesting when you get into people and companies and the society does the best that it can with the technology available at the time. Like, I firmly believe that humans of 50, 100, 20, 10, thousands of years ago, whatever kind of timescale you look at, they do the best with the tech available at the time. And sometimes um, a lot of theoretical stuff, a lot of academic, a lot of research, just it's not ready because of where the tech is or where culture and society is and stuff. But I think it's important to keep on going through with these things because you're right. Like, this is something that could be just normal in however many years' time, but right now is just like it's foreign. Or why would we do that? The irony being for me that people think that there's a lot more control, there's a lot more privacy and all this kind of stuff now. And it's like, no, you have so much that people can see in terms of your data out there just in the ether. You look at cookie trackers, people are able to see through all of the connected cookie data that's being collected so much insights about myself, about you, etc. Unless you do purging. So I think it's really interesting when you guys do this kind of stuff, and we're looking forward to the next round where we can actually talk more about the paper in detail because it'll be released by next month. But let's get into RWA tokenization and use cases now that you guys have, obviously we know about RWA for Redbelly and stuff. What classes of assets are you most excited about?
Yeah, so we've been tokenizing quite a different types of assets. I mean, like commodities and securities. I can give few examples that we have already tokenized. There is this rent roll, which is essentially a contract between a tenant and a real estate agent that ensures that there is 5%, income going to the real estate agent periodically. So this is a product that can be wrapped into a financial product that can be exchanged on secondary markets, and that is tokenized on Redbelly network platform. There is titanium, which is obviously a commodity that you can find in the ground, and there is this mine in South Africa that is extracting titanium and that tokenizes it on the blockchain before it becomes sold physically. So you can already trade it, 10,000 times on the network before you can really, the company can really physically sell it. And you have other types of assets. We were discussing about private equity shares. So you have, an interest in a private company that you cannot obviously trade it on the stock exchange, but you can use Redbelly network in order to exchange these stocks. And so immediately this liability that you have, which is, owning shares in the company, can become actually some assets that now you can grow on a secondary market as well. So all these type of assets are a good example of real world assets, and that's really what we're exciting about. Because as soon as this is real world, it's often tied to some high value, and for that you need a blockchain that offers certainty. You need a platform that is secure, and that's why we have built Redbelly networking in this way.
I really like it because there's a lot of thought that goes into where are these future use cases, even if it's not there, even if the use case, for example, you guys could have just jumped immediately into the hype type use cases, the memes, and culture is built around memes. There's nothing wrong with that inherently. It's just that there's already enough of that. And thinking about the future of like real game changing stuff, it's when people don't even realize that they're using blockchain. And yet it is how we come to trust and how we come to not just trust but verify and all that. So I like that you guys are taking that further. Going back to it around Redbelly's architecture, fixed fees, predictable finality, things like identity, accountability. This gives you guys an edge over, let's call it traditional crypto blockchains when it comes to institutions and corporates. Like, what are your thoughts on those things, those elements that really make Redbelly unique?
Yeah. So fixed fees is a big thing, right? So if you think about convincing customers to use a platform like ours, whether I mean a layer one blockchain, and you tell them, today it's going to cost you that much, but we don't know what it's going to cost you, tomorrow or even in 10 minutes from now. This is a big problem, right? Because businesses are not, like this. They are made with a proper anticipated budget. With some,
We should put like other gas prices as we're just talking and seeing other gas prices just be volatile, and then you see Redbelly just like that. Like,
it's super interesting. Yeah, and it's and the way we implemented it was also it required a lot of effort, and we collect exchange rates from different places in order to make sure our transaction fee, let's say, is for a simple transaction is always 1 cent of a US dollar. Of course, it might get higher if you have a complex smart contract invocation transaction, but a simple transaction will always be 1 cent of a US dollar. What is interesting is that we are collecting this exchange rate from different sources, and at times you can see that these sources make mistake, and so we really had to engineer a clever solution that will take the median of the median, which guarantees that the price remain always close to the reality. But anyway, this kind of feature is super important because you just want to budgetize your year ahead, and for that you cannot use a blockchain where the transaction fee is volatile, let alone the cryptocurrency in which it is expressed. So this is a solution. Now we're seeing actually people talking about the same thing. So competitors coming up with similar ideas like, we need fixed transaction fees. And this is very good because it validates our hypothesis that this was needed for the industry. And since we see that the competitors now are trying to do the same, then we feel like we're already ahead of that, but also we've taken the right decision.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think the next stage when it comes to overall adoption, and we're seeing it in countries like Australia already having an exposure draft and having a minister from the government read it into Parliament, which then requires analysis by others and then a second reading to actually make it law. We're seeing crypto regulations like actually going out there. So on the regulatory front, with that scrutiny rising worldwide, do you see a demand kind of shifting towards blockchain platforms that are explicitly designed for compliance? How is Redbelly positioned for the wave that's coming?
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting work that is being done right now as we speak. As you said, it has been read already at Parliament. What is interesting about this report is that there's the definition of the assets for which we need a finance license, right? An AFSL. And there are also rules around which you can get an exemption, right? So if you start trading, public stocks, then you will be exposing yourself, and you would need an AFSL in order to do so in this legal environment that is being defined here in Australia. But there are also this notion of public token infrastructure, which essentially gives you an exemption to such a license. And it's a really interesting, the way it's defined, it's really interesting because they clearly state that it has to be, and forget my bad lawyer vocabulary here. I'm not sure I can translate that correctly, but essentially the idea is that there is this multifaceted governance that is needed. And if you manage to show that you have this infrastructure that is governed by multiple entities, then you are exempt to having this AFSL license, right? So it's a really interesting thing because this is exactly where Redbelly is. Essentially, it's a multifaceted governed infrastructure in the sense that there is no single person that can really control the entire environment. And that's what Redbelly Network is aiming to become, right? So we're currently working on this 2026 objectives. And as part of our objectives, we want to speed up this multifaceted governance such that it matches also this definition and which will make Redbelly exempt to such a license. Of course, there are other avenues. If we don't realize, like from a legal perspective, that this is compliant with such a definition, which is still something we're working on, there is, of course, the other path, which is directly getting the license in order to offer the possibility to our users to trade public stocks, for example, or bonds on our blockchain.
Yeah, I think it's depending on like the use cases there are certainly there's certainly clear thought and very transparent in terms of like the way that you guys want to go about it, and I think as long as that's like clear, it's going to be really easy for people to understand where they sit, because I think the biggest problem with all of that kind of stuff is uncertainty. When you're on a clear pathway that yes, this falls outside of like regulatory capture versus it falls in, that it's okay because we've got the licenses and we take care of all that, then that's fine. Everything's hunky-dory. We do need, clarity over that. So that's really good. Let's get further into, a big project that's rounding out as we speak, because it's been 6 months now since the great announcement that Redbelly was not just the first public layer one to actually be part of a central bank pilot of digital currency, but also that it had multiple pilots in there, and, proud to be part of the team that's doing one of those with Arturo leading the charge with the securitization workflow, but there's also the stuff from MacroPod and others and Jelly C. With Redbelly being selected for that, what did that mean for you from like a technical, regulatory, timeline sort of thing? And what do you think are the next steps after this finishes in terms of collaboration with those other parties?
Yeah, so it was a very good recognition, I think, from both the government and the industry, because it's it's a partnership through the digital finance CRC, and we can see that we have the RBA, we have industry players that are all teaming up together, also along with academia, because there are also researchers that are doing their research within different universities as part of the TFCRC, all teaming up together and trying to find concrete solutions to the existing problems and test tokenization, right? So, so far it has been extremely successful. So we've seen we've learned a lot. So we have been discussing, for example, with different parties and trying to define essentially the terms. So explain to others how this public blockchain could scale, could perform at large scale, but while relying on some the responsibilities of some of the particular nodes that we call the governors. And because of this new beast, like this new layer one that was secure and offering this instant finality, which was central for, reducing settlement time and offering liquidity, reducing collateral that was needed for counterparty risks. So this new beast that was coming along had to be understood by the partners. So we went through an education process as well, where we had a lot of interactions with lawyers, with industry players, trying to explain why we have governors, what does it mean, why we have candidates, and what does it mean to pay a transaction fee, for example? Does it mean that you're paying someone in particular, or you're paying the network that will then distribute to the contributor of the network, which are the governors and the candidates? So we had to define all these things so that it would make sense from a legal perspective, and we were able to identify the flow of money, who was paying who, depending on using the transaction fees, the amount, and so on. So it was a very interesting learning process, and I think we came to the conclusion where we all agreed what should be the terms around this project and how everyone should play his part. It took us quite a while, and the project is still going on, right? So it's not even over yet. So I cannot really tell about the outcome, but what I'm gonna see and what I'm looking forward to is the final reports that will be generated out of these pilots, and essentially this will be a piece of information that we can build upon in order to do things. But in any case, what I can see already is that we've learned so much that now we have this let's say this agreed structure where essentially we can partner with, you were mentioning MacroPod or the RBA, and we know we can do things together around tokenization. Now, about the validation from a technical perspective, I would say that this is not as I mean, this was expected, right? That it would work. Why? Because, you have this instant finality at the layer one. So you know that if you implement this smart contract that will tokenize this bond, and you can probably implement a stable coin backed by a central bank, right? Because this has been done, and this is not so complicated to do, then you know that it will work, right? So I think that a lot of technological consequences are just were expected. But what we really want to know is what are the findings and how we can use this framework that we have defined where all the parties agree with each other in order to go forward.
I think it's going to be interesting as well, because just because there were 24 use cases, Redbelly being, three of those. I think three of those.
Yeah.
But, and there's all the 21 others that are like pilots as well as proof of concepts, and all the people that were probably thinking about doing stuff but just didn't get through. There is this like unique opportunity as well, because it's this group that's gone through this process and the previous like pilot in 2023 to figure out ways to also work with those guys. Right? Just because we didn't partner up in terms of these specific pilot projects doesn't mean that we're not A, already talking to, or B, potentially going to be doing something with those. And there's all the parties that are outside of this. So I think a big showcase like this, plus the report, is going to be absolutely fascinating for adoption. And I think there's a big learning curve here when it comes to commercial adoption. It isn't just something that you switch on. There's all of these elements that need to go into place. And I think a very important one is seeing how the government supports a tokenized world. That should be the biggest message out of all of this, because if they said, no, we're not going to do that, I would argue that it makes it so much harder for businesses, banks, commercial entities to try to do stuff. And if we're tackling the institutional space, that would be a big cross. But this is a big tick, big green. So that support, that tacit support from the RBA is super important. And it's only been 6 months. And obviously 6 months is a long time in crypto. People wanted more stuff to kind of happen, but 6 months is a very short time in terms of the real world. So I think it's been an amazing journey to keep on pushing. What do you think success for this looks like in, say, 12 to 24 months? Where do you want it to be in terms of, say, Redbelly adoption post the report from Acacia coming out?
Yeah, so I think, and the report will tell that I think that we have ticked the box in the sense that a lot of our hypotheses have been validated already. And as you pointed out, I think it's like just validating some use cases that involve a limited set of partners. But what we're going to see next year is that now, like the industry at large can now participate and can use these use cases, right? This has been validated. It will be published in the report. I think we will clearly see that there are some benefits which were linked to the hypothesis that we made initially. Not so many surprises there, at least for the people who wanted to do this thing, right? Because they knew that it was possible when they wrote their pilot description already. But once we have the validation and we have the use case that is implemented and working effectively, where you can see this quasi-instant finality that gives you this, settlement time that is so short that you don't need collateral. Now you have a lot of industry players that want to benefit from that liquidity. They want to benefit from not having counterparty risks when they settle. And this is what you're going to see next year, right? You're going to have this multiplicity of industry players that will be coming up on board, and that will be a game changer.
We're all about game changers here, and let's get into these terms that, because the other audience for this is I think the people that are in the mainstream that have not yet crossed over, people like where I was 5 years ago. Knowing about Bitcoin, but not really working in the blockchain technology space. So things like consensus, security. Let's talk about blockchain myths even. You've been open, and this has been very good at whether at Oz DeFi events and showcasing there, and I'll encourage people to watch that video that we had. But you've been open about vulnerabilities found in earlier blockchains, 2016, 2017, 2019, 2024, all of these. Actually, every year there's going to be some big vulnerability from that year. But how does that history that you've seen inform your approach today?
Yeah, no, and it's also frustrating. So you've seen, yeah. So when we publish vulnerabilities like we've done, 2019, 2020, 2017. So we found new vulnerabilities, right? We found new ways of hacking a blockchain, and that's why it deserves to be published because it's new. What is so frustrating is to see that you have this vulnerability that is known, and people keep exploiting it again and again and again. So like there was recently this hack where essentially the centralized scheduler for layer 2 got denial of service. And some people were surprised, and I was surprised that people were surprised, right? It's like people are assuming that layer 2 is secure, and then as soon as it breaks, then they say, oh, it wasn't secure. No, of course, we're doing things off chain in order to get better performance, not in security. It's a move away from the security. Yeah, I mean, as soon as intro, it tests you layer 3. Exactly.
It's like that's the thing where people don't realize this. It's like off chain also equates, and Arturo talks about this as well. Like in our own kind of private conversations, like layer 2. Not that I'm saying anything that it's all bad with layer 2. Everything has trade-offs. Security, get this, folks. There is no 100% security. It's all layers of things. But the trade-off that you have with layer 2 is the centralization component. And for some people, that's just not good enough, is it?
Yeah, and another example is essentially accountability. Like we use blockchains that are not accountable, and we've been doing that for so long now. And what happened back in the days, you remember, people would get hacked, like their assets would be stolen, right? Whether it's in the smart contract or even on the blockchain itself, like even at the time of Bitcoin, right? The double spending happened, right? They were hijacking internet service provider in order to hack Bitcoin users, right? So okay, we didn't learn from this lesson. That was 2014 when the Canadian internet service provider got hacked and someone double spent in Bitcoin, right? And now we're surprised when we get hacked again using the exact same technology, which is non-accountable. Like, on Solana now, people from North Korea apparently have managed to steal assets on a bit. And people are asking, how could that be? Oh, maybe there was maybe they could guess the private key that were used on some hot wallet. Okay, fine. But if you go to the root cause of the problem is that there is no accountability. So you can steal the assets of your neighbor on this network, and then you get away with nothing. So I mean, you get away with the loot, but you don't have any penalties for acting maliciously, right? So as long as we're going to be using blockchains that are not accountable, I can guarantee you that the amount of assets that will be stolen will just increase, right? There is no other way around. And I'm happy to repeat that again and again. But everybody should know that, more assets will get stolen in the future if you still use this non-accountable blockchain, just because there is an incentive. The amount of assets that is being used is just increasing as we speak. And so there will be more and more hacks, and they will be more and more devastating. So now that we have alternatives that are accountable, we should just move across and just do the same thing in a regulated environment where people know that they can get punished if they steal the assets of someone else.
I think it designing a world like this, and these primitives, basic building blocks, basically for people that what is a primitive? Like think of just Legos and building blocks, the Lego blocks of future society, of how we transact, of how we do things. Like we're not a barter system anymore. We're not a place where there is a wild west. There's rules and regulations. It's just that there are these inefficiencies, and I think blockchain tackles a lot of inefficiencies, but also, if used well, to your point, can create better security. And we're still so surprised. It's funny, it's sad, sorry, when these things happen, but it's just funny that we are so easy to forget the very recent past. So I think there's an important lesson there. Back to academic roots, you continue teaching, publishing, writing. Why do you remain so involved in the academia part and public education whilst running a startup, I've seen so many go from that space into startup world and scale up and commercial, and then just leave their academic roots. But you're still doing both. Why is that?
Yeah, I think it's very important to innovate personally, and there wouldn't have been a Redbelly network if it was not for the research we were doing at the University of Sydney with my group. I had postdocs and students doing research over there. I was not alone, and also visiting researchers of very high caliber who came to see my lab, and all these things together came up, led to some solutions that later on led to some algorithm that later on led to a layer one blockchain, and really a solution for some of the impediment that you could find on classic blockchains. So I think it's extremely important to work hand in hand with research, and you can find a lot of good researchers in academia. So it makes sense for me to just have one foot in academia. There are also areas that go beyond my area of expertise, right? So if I tell you about game theory, now I'm learning more about game theory and how it can increase the security of our network, just making sure that we incentivize people to really execute the protocol instead of misbehaving. So we were talking about accountability. This is extremely related, right? How much should you punish some misbehavior in order to incentivize someone to do good things, right? Given that it can steal a lot of assets by misbehaving, right? You should incentivize him more, like giving more money to behaving rather than what he can steal. That's core to the security of our protocol. There are other areas with cryptography, like, for example, how do you make sure that, you were talking about zero knowledge proof for identifiable, personal identifiable information. It's very important that these verifiable credentials we were talking about will not require the user to share more than what is absolutely needed, in order to authenticate and access some financial services on our platform. And zero knowledge proof is part of that. And we need to progress on this because at times, zero knowledge proof can be also quite expensive to execute and practice, especially if the transaction is quite complex and the things you want to hide is, it relates to a lot of different parameters. So we need to improve that. But also we're moving towards a world where, the classic cryptography as we know it might become out of date just because you have quantum computers that are powerful enough, and it might be coming sooner than what we expect, right? So we have to be prepared for that. And by having this collaboration with the research side, especially within academia, it allows me to really be at the forefront of the innovation. And we can cherry pick the bits and pieces we want to use in our platform. And it has been extremely rewarding to do that for the last, we're almost 5 years in now. We have been doing that, like, even though we were commercializing, we always looked at what was coming out in research. And we were also progressing the research in the areas that we wanted. And this has been extremely valuable because we are ahead in terms of accountability, for example. So it's very important from a research point of view. Mm-hmm. There's also, of course, the resources, right? So it's good to educate people so that they learn more about blockchain. You've talked about the myth, right? So it's good to debunk the myth as well, just to make sure people understand clearly what a blockchain is, as opposed to believing some folklore knowledge that happens to be, false and, just announced by some YouTuber. So it's important that they distinguish what is the true things rather than the, incomplete or informal or a bit vague knowledge. Because at the end of the day, when they get their degree, then we can hire them as well in the industry. And blockchain skills, which relates around cybersecurity, are extremely demanded. So it's good also to somehow have access to these, upcoming students and offering them a job when they get their final degree, like the PhD.
I think it's very important in terms of research and all the good things that are happening in that academic kind of world. It leads to these innovations. And, you mentioned before Ethereum. One thing, fun fact that I like to talk about from an Australian perspective is that a company that there's cybersecurity researchers, but they also have built a few things in terms of software, such as node validators, and they're called Sigma Prime, and they created Lighthouse, which is their software, which runs 30% of Ethereum's nodes, and it's an Aussie company, and people don't,
and I'm
realize
yes,
so I think
I'm super proud that one of their founder was doing his PhD at University of Sydney as well. And yeah, it's no, it's great, and yeah, they are doing great things, and they are also researching. So I've been talking to some of the people there, and they told me that they are doing fuzzing research in order to really assess
interesting.
what could go wrong in Ethereum by injecting pretty much random things. Like fuzzing is about this. Like you come up with this randomization of things that could be done, and then what you observe is a bad behavior or a bad consequence of this injection, and then you go backward and you say, oh, what did I do that led to this catastrophic failure? And then you can learn from that. And I've been talking to them. There are even some tools that they use in-house. I'm not sure it's still the case, but they didn't release publicly because they know that their effect would be devastating on the Ethereum blockchain.
Yeah, I think it's important to connect with the folks out there and to continue pushing the boundaries. The last question for this round is, what keeps you up at night when it comes to Redbelly? I'm sure there's like other things, going on in your life, but like especially for Redbelly, what do you say are things, is it the risks? Is it the technical, regulatory, institutional? Is it more on the positive, the adoption side and the steps that we need to take? What keeps you up at night, Vincent?
Yeah, so we used to joke. I remember we were posting on social media, like the marketing team was saying, oh, Vincent got woken up at 4 a.m., which is true, because the alerting system detected that Google Cloud was down. So there was a risk for the entire infrastructure, like for the entire network not to be available, right? But actually that was fine because we were relying on so many cloud infrastructure at the same time that just one of them going completely out of order would not impact our availability. So I woke up, I didn't go to sleep right after. That was the funny thing. Like Vincent could go to sleep right after, but so it keeps me awake, like these little risks, even though I know that our platform is extremely reliable. It has been up and running 100% of the time for a year now. I know it's reliable. I know that my team is great. They have implemented things in a very diligent way, testing everything and, reviewing this pull request very strictly. But in the end, there's always, a risk. Perfect security doesn't exist. So I think, going back to your question, what keeps me awake is the risks that we have. And as the organization is growing, now I'm working on implementing some processes in place such that even if you have this new intern that is coming along and it detects that there is a risk somewhere, it could be, a risk in some libraries that we're using, it can report it super efficiently to the board, right? So we have processes now that we're defining just to make sure that things get instantaneously flagged if it comes from anywhere in the company. And I think this is super important because as you grow, it might be hard to keep track of things or just make sure that someone will report it to his manager and, eventually will go his way to the risk register that will be presented to the board. So I'm working with the risk committee as we speak, improving these processes just to make sure we're completely across all the risks in the organization.
I think that's super important. And, all of these things add up to being able to sleep better at night. So hopefully you don't have, or if you are, getting up at 4 a.m. in the morning, that you're sleeping at least earlier than I typically do, around midnight. But in any case, Vincent, thank you so much for your time again. This has been a great episode. There's a lot of insights here. And I think, one thing that from what you mentioned before, all of these people saying stuff online, and, just true, not true. There should just be like an AI that helps you as you're watching something, just say, okay, that's interesting, or that you might want to question that. I'm sure that's going to be coming. Google and YouTube are probably doing something.
It's going to be hard. If the content that you train your AI model on still has some flaw or some myth, it's likely that the AI will just, spit the sage out of myth and folklore knowledge. But yeah, I wish we could live in a world where knowledge was coming out instantaneously of an AI agent.
Well, we will work on that world with all these building blocks. So Vincent and all the great stuff at Redbelly Network. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mark.
Yo. Yo. Redbelly insights, yeah, the Partax flow. Expert guest knowledge, watch the wisdom grow. Open markets, that's the motto, loud and clear. Track 5 meets the 5, banish all the fear. Redbelly, serpent in the grass, shedding no skins, moving real fast, bridging the gap. Future in his bite, Redbelly network shining never so bright. Yo, centralized chains, now we ain't playing that game. Decentralized dreams, shouting out the name. Partners on deck, stories they unveil. No more closed doors, just a financial trail. Redbelly, serpent in the grass, shedding no skins, moving real fast, bridging the gap. Future in his bite, Redbelly network shining never so bright. Yo, screens gleaming, vision so keen, capital flowing. A brand new scene from the outback whispers to the global stage. Redbelly's turned in a brand new page. Redbelly, serpent in the grass, shedding no skins, moving real fast, bridging the gap. Future in his bite, Redbelly network shining never so bright.